talk to their spouses. They can't talk to their significant others. And because of that, and you become a paid friend, a relationship starts. A relationship of sorts, which isn't supposed to happen. Okay, it's not supposed to happen. So another challenge during your professional relationship is how much information about yourself you're going to give to the client. A lot of people don't give any information. I give a lot of information mainly because it brings me closer to that select individual. But then again, I'm not counseling anymore. I don't do that. That's not my job. My job is teaching. And it's easy when you're teaching to give people information. You figure, hey, 4 years from now, you're going to be out of here anyway. And why would you remember what I have to say? After the dance is over, after the professional relationship is over, all ethical code strictures are removed. In other words, now you can do whatever you want as far as this individual. They can become your best friend. You can get married. However, ethically, you're not supposed to. Ethically, you're supposed to wait for at least 2 years before you start a relationship with any client that you might potentially have. 2 years. I know, sounds strange, doesn't it? That's the dumbest thing ever. 2 years? Really? 2 years? That's such a long time. But one of the things that you need to remember is, as the practitioner, you need to be careful about how much contact that you have with an old client, especially with an old client. This may cause confusion. This may cause damage to the individual. They did come in with a problem. Theoretically, you fix their problem, and if you start a relationship with this individual, or they start a relationship with you, it may cause them to have more trouble. More problems. They may relapse, and it's your fault. It's your fault. You have to remember that there's a power differential between the two of you. You were the counselor; they were the client. So there is a power differential. They're broken, and you're not, theoretically. So there is a power differential between the two of you. Seeing you out of the professional context may disclose vulnerabilities. Maybe you're a drinker. Maybe you are sarcastic. Maybe and they may not like the person that you are outside the counseling arena. It's a possibility. They may see something else in you. So you need to be careful as far as that's concerned. It will be difficult to accept this client professionally in the future, of course. Since you've started a relationship, now you have other information that you didn't have before. You have new information because you created information in this client's life. So starting a relationship with a client is probably not the best idea. Nurses do this all the time. They'll marry their patients. Doctors will marry their nurses. Counselors will marry their clients. And it usually is okay. Sometimes it's okay as long as both of them have realistic expectations as far as the relationship is concerned. When I was living in Montana, the one counselor in the area married one of her clients. I can't remember what his problem was. She never told me what his problem was, but he did. He told me what his problem was. He was bashful and he drank too much.
What a combo.
Yeah, so he didn't meet her as his counselor. He met her at the bar, and then he met her as a counselor. And they thought it was funny that we won't go into the rest of it, but they thought it was kind of humorous, and they started a relationship. She hated men with bald heads, and he was a billiard ball. He had no hair whatsoever. It was funny. And he immediately shaved his head. I mean, it was really kind of, I know he had that, that small amount of hair around his ears, and he just shaved it off. I don't know, it was really kind of bizarre, even though she hated it. And she thought it was funny. Most codes of ethics discuss the following ethical issues related to assessing your client. The assessment procedure or instrument should be within their scope of practice, your scope of practice, your education, and your training. And of course, we've talked about this before. Don't start using a technique that you've never been trained on. Clients should be fully informed about the procedure and be included in the procedure in a collaborative way. And this is one of the things that you need to do as a counselor. You need to discuss what techniques you're going to use with this select individual. No surprises. This isn't a Perry Mason television show, which none of you have ever seen. But it was a trial where there was always a surprise at the end. No surprises. There can be no surprises. That's informed consent. Appropriate instruments or procedures should be selected based on the assessment questions. Other problems that you might potentially have: assessment instruments and procedures used should be standardized and include normative data appropriate for culturally diverse or disabled clients. So if it is an instrument, and we've had this argument, we've been having this argument for the last 50 or 60 years, 70, 80 years. The MMPI, the famous MMPI, was standardized using a native population up in Minnesota. It's a Minnesota multi-phasic personality inventory. There are lots of natives in Minnesota. Chippewa, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, those guys, the Chippewa people. Okay. And they actually standardized it using that population. So would that be accurate for this population? Well, you guys aren't the same as Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Chippewa?
Different cultural practices.
Different cultural practices, exactly. Yeah, so this is one of the things that you have to look at. When administrating, scoring, and interpreting instruments, appropriate procedures should be adhered to. Clients should be given a clear and complete explanation of the assessment results. All test and interview data should be kept secure and released only to individuals who are competent in interpreting the data. And of course, this is a problem with any medical information that you may have, not just counseling information that you have, any tests that you have taken. The problem is that people don't really understand what they're looking at. If you've never been involved in interpreting this kind of information, then you really can't do it, and you need a professional who has that information. Informed consent means full disclosure of purposes, goals, techniques, and procedures, rules for assessment and counseling approaches used in language that is understandable to the client. This is kind of a trick. This is really not that easy. Some people are really, really smart. They are so damn smart that they memorize things, and they use the same words over and over and over again. Well, not everybody understands those words. Maybe I don't understand those words. So you have to put the information that you're giving to your client, you have to put that information in a nomenclature that they can understand. Common nomenclature. You have to think that maybe they don't understand what the hell you're talking about. It's a possibility. They haven't been to medical school. They don't have a master's degree in psychology or a PhD in psychology. So the probability is that they don't really understand what you're talking about. You need to make sure that they do. So you need to use words that they understand. I try not to use too big of words, because if I do, I'm afraid you guys will go, well, he's just trying to make everybody impressed with his knowledge and the information that he's got stuck in his brain. So I try to talk to you guys the way you'll understand it. And if I don't, please stop me and ask a question, because sometimes I don't know. I don't know what you know. I think I do. I think I have an idea. I can usually read people's faces, and when you're going, what? Usually that means I need to use better words. I need to explain it better. But the reality is, of course, you can't just go, well, we're going to use a Jungian technique today. Of course, they may have no clue who Jung is. They shouldn't. And even if they have heard of this guy, I mean, this is the way it's spelled. That looks like Jungian instead of Union. Is Jung, that sounds like he's from China. Is he Chinese? No, he's Swiss. It's German. Okay. How many people speak German? How many people speak German? Anybody speak German? Am I the only one? Okay.
You're awful.
I know. Of course, I was stationed there for 3 years, so I picked up a little bit of it. Okay, so you need to use nomenclature that they understand. Okay? Not the hardest thing in the world. Well, kind of it is. One of the problems with teachers, I don't know, maybe you had teachers when you were in high school who would use words that you didn't understand, and then they wouldn't explain it. And if you asked them, they still wouldn't explain it because they didn't understand. They couldn't put things in a vocabulary that you could understand, as strange as that is. Does anybody ever have a teacher like that? Maybe you have a professor here at this institution that talks like that. No?
Huh? Susan Wolf.
Oh, Sue?
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
Sometimes
Sometimes she'll have phrases
She'll
that,
just throw out a word like, whoa, what does that mean?
Are you impressed that she knows stuff that you guys don't know? I would rather you understand what the hell I'm talking about. I'll try to be good. Legal violations are distinct from ethical violations. Uh-oh, somebody's going to get arrested. Legal violations. You have a question?
no, I just said that there's, Bernie Dodson, the guy that writes the PR pieces for the college, he has a different way of writing things, so when he sends it into Navajo Times, they completely change it.
Oh, is that right?
So that way they use the normal language, they normalize the language that he's trying to do. So that's usually his frustration there.
Bernie Dodson is from Richmond, Indiana. Okay, and I'm from Muncie, Indiana. So Bernie and I, we
Have the same.
understand each other.
Yeah, like the other day, farriers was used. Dinek College farriers, and one of the DJs thought that they misspelled warriors.
Oh, no.
And I was like, no, farriers is used, as a group, cross-country running group.
Right.
And then we had to ask Jerry, who's our technician, our engineer, and he's like, yeah, I've heard it used like that before, so it's normal.
It's very
So,
common.
Yeah, very common.
Only Hoosiers.
Common where?
Yeah, exactly. Only Hoosiers understand what he's talking about. Ethical challenges are generally brought before a state licensing board, but can originate from a professional organization. So you can lose your license not only if it goes before a state licensing board, but your organization can bring charges against you, as shocking as that may be. Legal obligations to clients include duty to care, duty to respect their privacy, duty to maintain confidentiality, and we're going to talk about confidentiality in a minute. It's not absolute. Duty to inform, in other words, you tell them what you're going to do, you tell them how you're going to do it, how long it's going to take, and potentially what the outcome will be, hopefully what the outcome will be. That's known as a duty to inform. Duty to report. You have a duty to report select pieces of information. If somebody threatens to hurt somebody, to injure somebody, or to kill somebody, you have a duty to report the fact that this individual is threatening a select individual. And that's what duty to warn has to do as well.
Is that the two that will kind of have something to do with maintaining confidentiality?
Yeah,
Two
well,
there.
yeah. Primarily, you're supposed to be keep all this to yourself, but as soon as they start threatening people, then all of a sudden you have the duty to report and duty to warn. Duty to report is to turn them into cops, and duty to warn is to warn the person that they have threatened. As odd as that may seem. A lot of times, one of the things that happens as a counselor is that you will awaken emotions in this select individual. And sometimes those emotions are destructive emotions. And for that reason, of course, potentially if they were still stuck in their grandmother's basement, playing video games and masturbating all the time, everything would be fine. But you've brought them out of that shell, and now potentially they will strike out because you've released these emotions. So if they start talking about the people that they hate and the people that they want to injure, then you have a duty to report that to the police. If they tell you of a select individual that they want to harm, you have the duty to tell that person. Some states, not all states have the same laws. California, for example, if they tell you that they want to hurt Stephanie Sosi, then you have to call her on the telephone and tell her, I've got a client, this client doesn't like you, this client has threatened to injure you, so you need to be aware. In California, but in this state, I'm not exactly sure what the laws in this state are. Arizona pretty much follows California. Thanks, Sharon, good job. Anyway. Legal limits to confidentiality. Confidentiality is not absolute. Laws vary by state, and it really all depends on which state you're in. We are in Arizona, maybe New Mexico. I don't know how often you wander over into Crystal or whatever, but or Window Rock. I guess if you go down the road, you're in New Mexico. Anyway, so it really does. The two states have different laws, so you have to be really careful as to what law, what state you're dealing with. It is important to keep up to date in your own state laws concerning confidentiality requirements and expectations. These things will change. If an individual was in counseling and then all of a sudden they blew away 30 people, then potentially what's going to happen, the state's going to change the laws. They will bend the way that the politics of the times are bending, as it were. So if there is a shooting or of one kind or another, this select state may change their laws just because of that one incident. They changed their laws because men were stealing children and raping and murdering them. So they changed the laws so that you have to disclose that information. So if you have somebody that's a pedophile and somebody that seems to be a dangerous pedophile, and the thing about counseling a pedophile is that they will seem harmless, and they will just talk about this as a secondary thought. But the reality is they may act on those secondary thoughts. So you have to be really, really careful. They're not going to, and they really won't want to disclose their intentions to you. But of course they will come out, especially if you talk about sex. That didn't sound right, did it? A lot of people have sexual problems, and this is the reason they'll come in and talk to you. So if you can get this individual in a conversation dealing with sexuality, potentially one of the things that they will disclose is that they are attracted to select individuals, select groups of individuals. But they will seem shy. They won't seem like the person that would act on what they're talking about. But that's a pedophile. They're really good at hiding this information. Yes, ma'am?
So from there on, we have the duty to go to the police and report the individual?
It all depends on the state. Okay. I'm guessing in Arizona, yeah, you do. So if they disclose the fact that they're attracted to children and that this is the direction that their desires, this is the only direction that they go. One of the things that you will do, let's say you've got somebody that has disclosed that they have that they find select individuals attractive, and you're talking about a 13-year-old, or you're talking about a 5-year-old, or whatever. You're talking about somebody that's underage, and they're saying that they find those people attractive. The next thing that you have to do, or the next thing that you should do, is find out if they are exclusively find children attractive. So now you have to discuss whether they're attracted to adults. Does that make sense? Okay. If you find out that they're attracted to a select child and to adults, now probably they won't act on the attraction to the child. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So pretty much you have to figure it out before you make that judgment.
Yeah, because if you make a judgment and you call the cops and they go to visit this guy and he's going, what in the world's going on?
And it was just a secondary notion, not
Exactly.
a primary.
Right.
The PRV.
Exactly. You need to make sure that that's what the situation is, because he can sue you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to be really careful. But you also need to find out how deep this desire is, whether he will act on it. And usually you can tell. I know it's tough. And usually you can tell. You probably will never come across these individuals. Like I said, when I was doing consultant work in Ohio, this is what I was dealing with. I was dealing with pedophiles and rapists in prison, and we had to determine whether they should be released or not. And of course, state laws will tell you can't hold them for any longer than a select amount of time. Usually the jails were full, so they wanted to release them, but there were select individuals you didn't want to release. You didn't want to allow those individuals into the general population. Anyway, that was one of the things I got to talk about. It's horrible. Malpractice is defined as negligence in which a professional fails to follow generally accepted standards of the profession, resulting in injury to a client. And of course, the one thing you don't want to do is hurt the client. So let's take the situation we were just talking about. We've got an individual, and they've indicated that potentially they find underage individuals attractive. Maybe it is males, or maybe it's a male that finds young men attractive. We've seen this from time to time. We saw this with a senator from Illinois. No, he wasn't a senator. He was a congressman from Illinois who was a wrestling coach, and he found Dennis Hastert was the guy's name. He was the Speaker of the House for a while, and he found young men attractive. He was a wrestling coach, and he used to sit in front of the shower and watch the boys take showers, which seems a little odd. Now that we're thinking about it, well, why was he doing that? And now that we think about it, it seems a little strange, but at the time nobody said anything or thought anything about it. So if you've got an individual that has indicated that this is a problem, and you've plumbed his sexual desires, this select individual, trying to discover if they're also attracted to adults, when do you make that call to the police, saying that this is a potential child molester? You better make sure that it's just not some strange fantasy that this guy has. We can have ideas. People have ideas all the time. I had a bad dream last night. Didn't have anything to do with sex, but I had a bad dream last night. I mean, if I told you about my dream, you might go, "Oh, this guy's nutty. He's a fruitcake." But the reality is, it was just a dream. You don't have no control over what you dream. Anyway, so you need to make sure, right? All right. Because you don't want to do any harm. And you will do harm to that client if you turn him into the cops and say, "Hey, this guy seems to be a child molester to me." Yeah. He has talked about it in counseling, and I think maybe he will act on that. And then of course, he has no idea that that's what would potentially happen. I used to work with a lady whose husband had sleep apnea, and he fell asleep in front of a school one time. He was driving down the road and he was so tired that he just stopped. And all of a sudden he got arrested because he had stopped in front of a school. Well, he didn't even know where he was. He had fallen asleep while he was driving. He stopped as soon as he found a place to stop, and it just happened to be in front of a school. So all of a sudden people are accusing him of observing the children at play, that he may potentially be a child molester because he was parked in front of a school. And in order for him to get off, what they had to do was give him a sleep analysis that he had to pay for, by the way, sleep analysis to see that he had sleep apnea, and that was his real problem. Okay, so you don't want to hurt your client. You need to be really careful about this. this kind of stuff, especially accusations. One of the things that you're going to be talking to your client about is their fantasies. Are fantasies something that they will ever act on? And the answer is probably not. Fantasies are fantasies. The client must prove 4 things about the practitioner to recover damages. If they think it's malpractice, the practitioner owed the client a duty to conform to a particular standard of conduct. In other words, hugging therapy or whatever. There are counselors who have used sex as a therapy technique with their clients. One of them was a very famous psychologist by the name of Albert Ellis. Ellis would have sex with some of his clients as therapy. He said it was therapy because they had a low self-esteem and he was trying to build up their self-esteem, which seems kind of odd. Well, that doesn't really fit with any standard of practice, having sex with your clients. So that's one of the things that you have to they can prove. A practitioner had an obligation to follow defined standards of care, and of course that has to do with the same thing. The practitioner breached the duty by some act of omission or commission in their professional practice. In other words, they either did something they weren't supposed to do or they omitted something that they were supposed to do. They didn't tell them about something. The client or others suffered measurable damage or injury because of it. So if you accuse your client of being a potential rapist or whatever, then of course that would do undue damage. The practitioner's conduct was a direct approximate cause of the damage, and of course that's what they have to prove. Not the easiest thing in the world. Here is a list of the malpractice, what they are, the 5 reasons for malpractice of practitioners in the United States. The number 1 cause is incorrect treatment. In other words, they were supposed to use Jungian therapy, they were supposed to use Rogers, they didn't use any technique whatsoever. The second is sexual impropriety. It's a lot more common than you think it is, strangely enough. Well, the reality is that here you are, you're cloistered with this individual for an hour every 3rd day, 2 days a week. You get really close to these select individuals, and sometimes you can get a situation where the individual uses their sexuality to keep from talking about serious things. Okay, so I had a friend.
In Wilson's words, don't be easy.
I had a friend, and he was the guy that was dealing with all these sexual predators and whatnot. So one of the individuals that was going to prison came in to talk to him, and he brought his wife with him. His wife was a drop-dead gorgeous individual. She dressed very provocatively, and as it turned out, it was because that's what he wanted. That's what this guy wanted. This guy was going to prison, and what he was doing was setting a baseline. And one of the things he said was, "Will you take care of my wife while I'm in prison? She may have some problems." Well, when they got into it, she had lots and lots of problems. She had been a daddy's girl growing up. Her father ignored her, and the only way that he paid attention to her was when she flirted with him, as strange as that may seem or sound. So she learned to control men with their sexuality, because that's the only time her father paid any attention to her. Not that she was seducing her father. So she was constantly looking for a father figure, and of course she found it in men that responded to her obvious attributes, to her physical attributes. She was able to get away with anything, with everything, because she just flirted. If it was a male, she just flirted with him. She tried to stay away from females because she couldn't manipulate them like she could manipulate males. So here she is. She comes into counseling the first time, and she tries to seduce the counselor. It was my friend. My friend had been a stripper, a male stripper, and he was a very attractive man. Yeah, he was a very attractive man, and he was married to a lady that was also a counselor, and so he immediately dropped her. He immediately transferred her to his wife, and of course she didn't want to do it because she couldn't control females, but she could control males. But you know, he wouldn't talk to her anymore, or he wouldn't see her anymore. And every time she came in, he would leave the room, and his wife would come in to do the counseling. Eventually, the whole story came out. The whole story came flooding out. This individual, one of the things that he had done with this lady, he had no respect for her because he saw her as a sex object. He would sell her to his friends. His friends would come over and he'd say, you want to have sex with my wife, that kind of thing. And she had such a tremendously low self-esteem that, why am I telling this story? Oh, sexual impropriety. Okay. So as it turned out, of course, she started talking to this lady, and eventually it was discovered that she had no female friends at all. She had no contact with females whatsoever. And the reason is because females were either very jealous of her, and they didn't like her, or they didn't want to be around her because it made them look like an unattractive person.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Okay. So she had no female friends whatsoever. She only interacted with males, and of course she could control males through her sexuality. And if the male was manipulative, then he could manipulate her to do just about anything. So it was a really ugly situation. So there was a lot to fix with this lady. Eventually, of course, she divorced her husband, who had been using her. He had been pimping her out, as it were. So eventually she divorced him, and she went to college. She tried to create female friends around her. She had to change her everything, her lifestyle completely. She had to start dressing differently. She had to throw all of her clothes out and start dressing differently. Everything she had displayed her physical attributes. So she had to change everything. She started wearing glasses because glasses made her look more studious. And she bought, and the glasses they weren't real glasses, they were just clear glass. But she wore them so that the males would see her differently. And it worked. It was absolutely successful as far as she was concerned. Anyway, okay, so sexual impropriety. Eventually she went to college and became a counselor. As interesting as that is. Okay. I know. Poor thing. And she was a very attractive woman. She stopped wearing makeup. She stopped wearing lipstick. She dressed in large dresses so that you couldn't see her physical attributes. She was very slender with a relatively large chest. So these were all obvious attributes that needed to be hidden. And eventually she became a counselor, and everything worked out the best. She was especially good with individuals who were having problems with sexual orientation. So she counseled transgender people. She counseled lesbians and gay individuals that were having trouble coming out. Of course, that was a long time ago when a lot of this was against the law. So everything changed completely. So incorrect treatment is the leading cause of malpractice with counselors. Sexual impropriety is relatively high. Strangely enough, it's relatively high. Breach of confidence, failure to diagnose or incorrect diagnosis of the client, and we see this all the time. If you get two psychologists in the same room and they're talking to the same person, the probability that they get the same diagnosis isn't all that high, actually. What you think is a classic case of bipolar disorder, somebody else is going to diagnose as borderline personality disorder. It's just, You know, it's kind of a toss-up. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. So which do they have? Well, when they, what it may be is that if they're not in crisis, they may look like they're borderline, but when they're in crisis, it looks like bipolar disorder. So,
Bruce,
yeah.
what if you have somebody who's in distress and you're studying to be a counselor, but the real counselor is like 2 hours away and this person is really like freaking out, having anxiety and everything?
Right.
Is it ethical for that person that is studying, counseling?
You're not a professional yet. So,
Yeah, is
is
it ethical, or what would be like some of the methods that you would use just to help until the real counselor got there?
Well, it all depends on what kind of freaking out.
Well, like severe anxiety
Right.
and like maybe.
One of the ways you can help people with severe anxiety is to stay with them and just to not show distress yourself. Usually people will normalize to whatever the people around them are at, however the people around them are acting. So if they're acting freaked out, overly anxious and whatnot, if you act not anxious, then
Would be okay.
those should be okay.
Take a walk with them.
Yeah, that'll
Water
work.
garden.
Yeah, I had a situation yesterday that was kind of like that. Somebody was freaking out, and then somebody wanted to help them, and they were freaking out because the other person was freaking out.
Yeah.
And what the best thing to do is just to act like everything's okay. If they're overly anxious and there's no reason for their anxiety. Of course, if they're in danger, if somebody's threatened, then you need to protect them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Pretty
Someone-
much like don't go into theories or methods, but just like be a friend,
Yeah.
a confident,
Which is-
handle it like at a peer level kind of way.
Exactly.
I know, because I had a really bad anxiety attack when I was with my husband. We were in Walmart trying to send money to my mom, and that was the whole reason of the anxiety attack. And he was getting anxious too because he has PTSD. He was aggravated too.
Ah.
So that did not help the situation at all because it made it worse, and it made, it changed the area around me too. Like
Sure.
the lights changed, everything got brighter. All of a sudden I just wanted to punch everybody and just wanted to get away. So I think like what you're saying, to just, like had he just
Right.
left me alone, let me do what I needed to do and him take off,
Right.
I would have been okay.
Okay.
Yeah. But he didn't, he was right there the whole time.
Of
so
course
I
he
was-
was. He didn't want to leave you
Oh,
because you were having a panic attack.
Yeah, but yeah, that is.
Yeah, the only
That's
thing,
usually the best thing, though, is somebody
Yeah.
just,
yeah, just try to keep everything calm.
yeah.
You need to be the logical person in the situation. Some people react emotionally to a situation like that, just like
me.
your husband did. No, what
Oh,
your
yeah.
husband did with PTSD. He
Mhm.
just needed to leave. He needed to take off and get away from the situation.
Mhm.
Otherwise, things might have gotten physical. Yeah, which is the way
Yeah.
is the way guys handle things. So, yeah, you just need to be the calming force. And of course, suicide of a patient, of course, that doesn't look good on your resume. Well, I've only had 15 clients commit suicide while I was counseling them. That's pretty good. If a practitioner loses in court, there may be several consequences. They might be fined for damages. They may be punitive damages where they have to pay money, or it may be that you'll have to give, either you have to give them further counseling, which probably they won't have you do it, or somebody else has to give them further counseling. So you'll have to find somebody that will agree to talk to your client. You may lose your licensure. You may, of course, your reputation will suffer. Future difficulties in obtaining malpractice insurance because you've had a case that went against you. The court case, whether won or lost, might damage the practitioner financially, emotionally, or professionally. And of course, if you're ever taken to court like this for a malpractice, the thing that hurts you the most is not the money, it's the feeling that you failed. That's the thing that will bother you the most. as
Can you
for,
get in trouble if you're a licensed counselor and you're providing counseling to people? Can you get in trouble if you're working for a facility and they lose some of their licensing? Or
Yeah.
Because my daughter works for a place, she does the medical billing and everything, and all the counselors are quitting because like,
They're losing their reputation by moving there.
oh, okay.
oh, that's why they're leaving, yeah. Yeah, it can be a problem, a very serious problem. Minimizing the risk of ethical or legal challenges, adhere to up-to-date practice methods, make sure that you understand what's going on out there. A lot of things are changing because of the internet. So what was true in the past is not true now. There's a lot of anger in the United States right now, a lot of problems going on in the United States, a lot of racial tension that we didn't seem to have under President Obama. Trump seems to be fostering these things. Good documentation of practices, so you need to stay on top of this kind of stuff. Psychology stays about 10 years behind anyway. So we are now in the media world. Well, they're still writing things down, and they're still thinking in that vein. So one of the things that you need to do is make sure that you're on top of everything. Make sure that you have, if things have changed, make sure you're on top of that. Video games, the video games have just really thrown a monkey wrench into a lot of the counseling, and it has to do with the fact that some people, not all people of course, some individuals can play a video game and then as soon as the game is turned off, they go back to reality. But there are other individuals who play that video game and they think of themselves as that avatar. I was reading an article yesterday. They were talking about the whole new dating scene. Evidently, people are dating online. They're hooking up online, and they are creating avatars, and people are falling in love with each other's avatars. Wait a minute. And they're saying meeting people face to face is not the way people are doing anything anymore. It's just not happening. So people are doing this whole, they have an alter ego online, and they're creating avatars, and the avatars are what people are actually responding to. And so if you're interacting with somebody and you interact as yourself, that's old school. Nobody does that anymore. You have to be your avatar, and you have to live up to your avatar's values and principles or something like that.
Almost seems like that movie with Bruce Willis in it called Surrogates, to where there's like AIs. People buy these AIs, whatever kind of AI, they can be male,
Right.
female, whatever gender, whatever, you be whatever they want to be.
Sure.
And they sit home and they're on the computer like this controlling their surrogate, and their
Right.
surrogate's out there, being a billionaire.
Right.
While the real person's at home being a couch potato and, or it's
Things
like
that
a really pretty girl, but it's a
Yeah.
real nasty
Yeah.
big guy. Or like the little baby boy, but it's actually a real old man.
I have a-
Luring people in.
I know, it's so weird. I have a friend that's he's a physicist, and he and his wife do all this online stuff all the time. And one of his characters is a female, but I think she's a lesbian. I'm not exactly sure, but she wears a tutu, a pink tutu. That's her. I know. And I asked him, why do you have a avatar that's a female? Why did you do that? And he can't
The
explain.
female part's okay, it's the tutu part that I question.
His wife is almost about half the time she's a male rather than a female, and all of this is. I know. So what's going on in the world? How in the world are we going to deal with these individuals? So somebody comes in for counseling, and they've got all these avatars. They've got all this online persona. Mm-hmm. And part of their world is living that avatar, is living on the internet rather than in the real world. So I'm counseling them as a face-to-face as a person, But do I also have to counsel their avatar? Or find out why they have this avatar?
Do you think it could be like split personality? Or, you know.
It's an ego and an alter ego, is what it is, I guess. We're gonna have to deal, you guys are gonna have to deal with this. I'm not gonna have to deal with this, but you guys are the ones that are gonna have to deal with this.
And then with the whole new age of comics too, being online, and not just that, but the Korean, Japanese, and the Chinese, anime
Right.
characters, that's something that I have to keep an eye on for my kid, because my kid is into that stuff. So I have to go into her phone all the time, and check who her characters are,
Sure.
what game she's playing, who she's communicating with, how old these people are. Like, I'm on there doing research, looking up who these people are on other sites to see their mannerisms and
Right.
how they interact with other people. And if I don't like it, I'm like, no, get off, or I'm taking that away. And she hates me because of it, but I mean, this is, like you said, this is something we're gonna be
You guys are
dealing
gonna
with.
have to
I'm
deal with.
already dealing with it
You're
on
gonna have to deal
a
with it.
personal level. And I don't even know how it's gonna be. And I mean, Denise just had a question here earlier. What did you say?
That people who are gamers, and like you were saying, they select female
Right.
avatars. Like, do you think that they have a different sexual orientation? Like, if there's a study out there that study gamers and.
Nobody's ever done
See,
anything.
that's what I was telling him. That's a good thing to research, because no one's gotten there yet.
It could potentially be, but what do we know about gamers?
Or if it's like a fantasy to be a different.
Exactly. Is it a fantasy? Is this somebody that they want to be? Why do they want to be that select individual? I'm going to talk about sex just for a quick second, okay? The reality may be that if it's a male and he selects a female avatar, and this female avatar is very well endowed or whatever, it may be that is his sexual focus. So he wants to be that avatar because this is the person that would never have anything to do with him. So now he's going to be that avatar in order to feel like that avatar would have something to do with him. So despite the fact that he's selected an opposite sex avatar, the reality is that the reason he wants to be that avatar is so that he can fantasize about having sex with that avatar. Are you guys okay? You understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Could
Okay.
it also be that they want to get ahead in the game? That why they're girl avatar?
I don't understand how all that stuff works. I'm just thinking of it as a psychologist and trying to figure out why in the world a guy would be this lady with 38 double D. These outfits.
What's
Yeah,
that?
I'm just trying to understand why this guy would do that.
So it'd probably be a question between a wish and a want. Like the thin line
Okay.
there, what crosses into
Exactly.
that and what crosses
Yeah.
back into this.
Right. Yeah, how many,
Those people would need to have a healthy mind to at least live that kind of lifestyle, to not go too far.
and the vast majority of people that are doing this do have a healthy mind. And they can separate themselves. And they do understand what's going on. But we may have a select individual that,
Multi-personality
Oh.
disorder?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't it be like a multi-personality disorder?
Would that, yeah, that's what I was gonna say next, would that be in the
Not yet.
DSM-5 later on?
Maybe.
And that might be another,
Maybe in the future, we will come up with that idea. I mean, we're not dealing with this at all. The people that are writing the DSMs, these are old farts that they don't even email, okay? Exactly. So, this is something for the future, and it's something that you guys may potentially have to deal with. When we're talking about, this is one of the things we saw with cartoons. Back in the 70s and 80s, we stopped drawing cartoons in the United States. So we started buying cartoons from Japan. Well, the Japanese have a different culture than we do, as we learned in cultural psychology. They have a different culture than we do. They're collectivists, we're individualists. Before we had Superman, and Superman was a singular hero. And we had Mighty Mouse, and we had and Popeye. We had all of these heroes that were singular, individualistic heroes. They didn't have any friends that helped them fight. These were singular heroes. And all of a sudden, the Japanese started doing our cartoons, and now all of a sudden, everything is in a group. The Justice League. Superman can't fight anybody by himself. He has to have Batman with him and Wonder Woman and whatnot. So all of a sudden, we weren't seeing cartoons that were individualistic. Now all of a sudden, the culture of cartoons has changed with the whole anime thing, which is, you guys have never been to Japan, so you've never seen this stuff, but their culture is not the same as ours. And if we have an individual that reads those cartoons and follows that avatar, whatever, this is where I got the whole 38 double D thing, because the Japanese are flat-chested, and here all of their characters are large-chested,
Yeah.
as strange as that may seem. But the point is that their culture is completely different, and if we start using their mindset, if we start playing their games, then potentially that will change our culture. From what we were before to what we are now, or what they are now.
And that's usually what my conversations end with my daughter. It comes back down to culture.
Right.
Because over the weekend we had to help out my in-laws with their Inuit ceremony. And my daughter, she was getting ready reluctantly, being a teenager, like, well, I want to stay home and whatnot. And I'm like, dude, you participate in all these other cultures,
Right.
willingly
Right.
participating,
Right.
happily participating in these
Right.
other cultures. The least you could do is participate in yours and be willing to participate in your own thing too. Because I said, if you're going to go off and do those things, you're going to lose who you are if you don't know who you are here. If you're not enjoying who you are here, you're never going to get what you want out of those other cultures. And so that's something that I always end up ending all my conversations with her, is coming back to that, is your culture.
Eventually, everybody may lose their culture, because they will start the gaming culture. Yeah, and they're borrowing this stuff from another culture, and it's a mixture. It'll be a mixture of your culture plus whatever, My Little Pony, whatever. I don't know. I know.
And I have to balance that.
And
with
you
teenagers.
guys are going to have to play with this game, and I'm not, because
You're
I'll
just
be
like,
out. Actually, I have a grandson, and we'll see what happens with my grandson. We'll see. The following activities may lead to malpractice, sexual relationships with a client. Of course, if they are still a client and you have a sexual relationship with them, that is inappropriate. And of course, you can lose your license for that. Practicing beyond your scope of competency. Fraudulent billing. If you're dealing with a white population, money is really, really important to these people. And they will, if you charge for something that you didn't give them, boy, I'll tell you what, they will be right on top of you, because money is really important. So fraudulent billing is huge. It is massive as far as the general population in the United States is concerned. Violation of reporting laws, breach of confidentiality, or refusal to provide records. These are all problems that people have.
Yeah.
So how do you make these decisions? How do you decide if something's ethical or unethical? Ethical dilemmas involve making a choice between two or more relevant but contradictory ethical directives, where every alternative results in some type of undesirable outcome for one or more persons. And this is a really serious problem. It's a damned if you do, damned if you do anyway. It doesn't make any difference. Somebody's going to suffer. So you have to make an ethical decision. When I make an ethical decision like this, where somebody's going to suffer, usually I take as much suffering as I possibly can. So I don't want somebody else to suffer because of the situation. So I take the hit. But I can do that because I don't care.
With the ethical question there, it's like, I was reading the HIPAA, because we were talking about,
Right.
the information, when can you
Right.
say something?
Right.
And it kind of makes it easy here by using two words, saying that if it does or doesn't rise to the level of seriousness and imminent. So that's kind of the picture. They make it a little bit clearer.
Right, but you have to decide what's serious
Yeah.
and what's imminent. The case of where this all started, Tarasov case. They had a young individual that was an immigrant to the United States. He was on a student visa. He was at University of Berkeley. And he said that he wanted to kill a select student. This is an individual that he had fallen in love with. She had interacted with him to some extent, but had never romantically. And of course, he wanted to date her, and she would not date him. And he said that he wanted to injure her. The counselor thought that he didn't have the capability of hurting her. So he didn't say anything. He didn't say anything to the police. He didn't say anything to her. Eventually, this guy murdered the young lady that he had this fascination with. So the counselor was wrong. He didn't think that the guy had the capability of doing this. He misinterpreted the situation. And he lost his license. And of course, then he was sued. The family sued him. They took it all the way to the California Supreme Court. And then they came up with this idea that you have to disclose this information. If somebody wants to injure somebody or do damage to somebody, serious and imminent is the nomenclature. But you as a counselor have to decide whether this is true or not. The reality is, as soon as you tell the police that this individual is a danger to somebody, you can't counsel him anymore. He won't want to have anything to do with you, or she, whichever the case may be. You've just lost her as a client. And so anything any positive things that you have done for this individual, they all go out the window. If you've been working with her for 6 months, you've just wasted 6 months. That's the way it works. So if you decide that this person is an imminent danger to somebody, if it's that serious, you're also throwing out all the counseling that you've done up to this point out the window. It's really kind of sad. So you got to be really careful. And you've just lost. Money's not important, but you just lost a client. And you may lose your reputation.
That's what I was gonna say.
Now the reality is, if you stop somebody from committing suicide, how do you know that you stopped them from committing suicide? Is it possible that we have interacted with select individuals and stopped dozens of suicides? We're all heroes because we've stopped all these people from committing suicide. But you never know, do you?
Mm-hmm.
You never know unless it happens.
I think you can only stop them in that moment.
Oh, you have to, yeah. It's usually a momentary thing anyway.
And some people are suicidal all their life, and they had these issues growing up and everything, and one day they just, and they don't even give you no sign or
Right.
nothing, and you just do it.
Right.
And you're like, you're just happy.
But how do you know if you actually stopped the suicide? I mean, that's the whole point. If they do commit suicide, you know that you failed. But what if they didn't commit suicide? Do you know that you stopped them from committing suicide? No, you never know, of course. Okay. You only know if you failed, you never know if you're successful. As strange as that may seem. Oh, it's so weird. So you can't brag, well, I stopped 115 suicides. You can't say that. You don't know that. You don't know if they really would have done it. And of course, if you're dealing with 100 people, then probably you're dealing with 15 that would have actually committed suicide, even if they say that they're going to do it. Reamer in 1995 describes 2 principles that can guide practitioners in resolving ethical dilemmas. Beneficence, where the practitioners should take action intended to help or benefit others. So you should always try to do something positive for people. That's what beneficence means. Non-malfeasance, where the practitioner should act without malice in order to do no harm. And that's the one thing that should be your guiding principle, is do no harm. Maybe I didn't help you, but at least I didn't hurt you. I didn't make you feel worse. In medicine, that's what we try to do. We try not to hurt anybody. Maybe we didn't cure you, maybe we didn't make you feel better, but at least we didn't hurt you. because there's a lot of things in medicine that are painful, surgery and whatnot. Elaine Congress is a social worker who came up with the ethic model of decision-making in 2000, and this is what the ethic model is. E, examine all the relevant client, personal agency, professional, and societal values, including personal, societal, cultural, agency, client, and professional values. T, think about ethical standards of your professional code of ethics and relevant laws. H, hypothesize about all the possible consequences of different decisions. I, identify all who might benefit and all who might be harmed. It is often necessary to research potential consequences of possible decisions on all of those individuals involved. C, consult with supervisors and colleagues as you begin to formulate choices. When a supervisor, colleague, or consultant is involved, the final decision must take their thoughts into consideration, and that is how you deal with an ethical dilemma. Wow. And these do come up from time to time, unfortunately. Okay, and that's the end of chapter 3, I think. This is the 4th week, so I need to start on chapter 4 if I can find it. I was just looking at it a second ago. Oh, that's chapter 5. Wait a minute. Chapter 4 is a really, really short one. It's only like, oh, there it is right there. All right. Before we get into chapter 4, let me ask you a quick question. How important is sex?
Very
Not important at all.
I think it's important. Helps people
How often is this going to be the problem that you have to deal with?
75%.
If you think you're going to get into counseling and this is never going to come up, think again. It's going to come up a lot. People have problems. And even if they have problems that don't have anything to do with sex, sex is going to get involved with it because it is interfering with their lives. And sex, of course, is something that, well, I don't know. Is it important or isn't it important?
Depends on how old you are. Depends
No, it
on-
doesn't.
Oh, really? Okay.
Does it?
Yeah. it
Okay.
is.
So it all depends on how old somebody is. Is it? So
Well, I mean, it depends on how old they are and what gender they are. You know,
Okay.
like for a female, they're just like, whatever, you know. But for a man, it's probably like,
Super important.
yeah, probably.
I just made that up. I don't know if it is or not. You think it's important? Okay. You think it's important? We're going to have to talk. I mean, yeah. Okay. So if it is important, we're going to have to talk about it, right? Is it important? Is it important? Okay. It is? Okay.
Weekdays maybe, weekends yes.
Is that the way it works? Let me
Well,
call.
those are the kind of things.
Let me
that
call
are
my
coming
wife
up
and
with
see if
some
you're
of
right.
the clients. What'd you say? Like, I'll take
Weekdays
it
is
off
not
days.
important, but on the weekdays it is.
Not holidays.
Not
Just kidding, no,
holidays.
just kidding.
So it's not,
So
It's
yes,
not, it is important.
it is
yeah.
important. Is it important? It's not important. It isn't. It isn't. So you're the only one that says
It is.
Oh, I've met people who are like that were going into their 60s
Yeah.
that were still a virgin and they died a virgin. You know, and
that. Okay.
and like every time you talk sex or say something, they be like,
Don't say anything to me.
stop.
I don't want to hear it. Yeah, it's something that you got to deal with. And the strange thing is you can't talk about it in class. That's the weird part. There is a class on human sexuality, but we don't teach it here. It's on the books. We could teach it if we wanted to. I could talk anybody into letting me teach it. But the reality is that when you start counseling people, this is something. I mean, if they're not sexually active, then potentially it won't come up, but if they are sexually active, it may be something that, that they want to discuss. Maybe it has to do with their sexual orientation, or how they feel on the inside. I had a brother-in-law who's now my sister-in-law. Well, he's not anymore, because my sister died. But he changed genders. He's transgender. And that should have been something that he talked about to people, but he never did. He wouldn't talk to anybody. And then finally he disclosed to my sister that he was transgender, that he felt like a female on the inside. And this is really important stuff, because it killed her. She got so depressed that she developed all kinds of interesting problems. She had heart disease, and then she developed cancer. Before that, she was healthy as a horse. So this really affected her emotionally, as you can imagine. But we can't talk about it in class. That's just the way it works. If I start talking about it in class, one of you guys is going to say something, and Sue is going to just have a fit. She's already had a fit once. Okay, but I think it's important. And I would be remiss if we didn't mention it, okay? It's going to be something that comes up in your counseling. And it may not come up the first time, may not come up with your second client, but your third client, that's all they're going to want to talk about. Not only that, but if this is an area that's taboo as far as you're concerned, you don't want to talk about sex, this is how they're going to control you, by mentioning it. If you start to get into something that's uncomfortable for this select individual, they're going to use that topic as a way to get away from what they don't want to talk about. They're smart. Clients are smart. They know what hurts. And of course, if you're talking about something that hurts, then they will use that against you to keep you from delving into that topic area. Okay? That hurts. I mean, this is something that they don't want to get into. That's why they're coming to counseling. And this is what you need to get into. You need to talk about whatever this subject is, and they will use that. They will swear. If you don't want them to swear, they will use all the F words you can think of to keep you away from the topic that they don't want to deal with. That's the way it works. Yes, ma'am.
What's a good book to read on the topic of that?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure there is a good book.
Because on the reservation, there's a lot of incest and also child molesting and all that stuff.
Sure.
Pedophilia.
Yeah. And
Good touch, bad touch. Like
Yeah.
for little kids, it
Yeah.
would be good touch, bad touch.
And people grow up with it and they grow up with, how do you say it? It's hard on their sexual life, I guess.
Sure.
They grow up, and I see it a lot among my family, and mainly on my side of the family. So, no one doesn't like to talk about it.
But you just did.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I accepted it and I wanted to learn more about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that you can help people in the future.
And you have to break the cycle, because I heard like once it happens to an individual, then they are more likely to pass it down to
Exactly.
another individual.
They think it's normal.
So it's like domestic violence, you have to break that cycle.
Right. Right, and that's the problem. It becomes something normal that happens in select families.
So since you can't teach it, is there like a book that's in mind that we could?
Let me see if I can find something, okay? I've been dealing with this all my life, all my adult life. I've been dealing with this all my adult life. Working in the emergency room, a third of all the cases that come in have to do with child molestation, rape, all of these things happen. And it usually, or a spouse that's molesting his wife, or destroying her one way or another. And it's because she can't say anything, and he thinks it's normal. Now, all of a sudden, you know, we've just got this repeating cycle, and that's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, let me see what I can find. Let me see if I can figure it out.
There used to be a billboard up in Chinle right at the stoplights that had something to do with that. It said something about sexual violence isn't right, it's time to speak up, and then on the
Right.
sides it says that even though it is taboo, you know, you have to talk about it to prevent incest and
Right.
all the things that come up from. But that sign only stayed up for 3 months and it came down.
I don't know, where does it fit traditionally, talking about
Well,
this taboo
traditionally,
subject?
I mean, we have a lot of stories traditionally that don't not talk about sex. I
Okay.
mean, the stories that we hear, yes, they are cleaned up, but the more traditional stories, the more kind of like the actual accounts of how those stories, the songs, certain prayers came about, their underlying stories of it are different. You know, like for Changing Woman, how she got pregnant with the twins, nobody ever talks about how. They know from what elements, but how that happened with the elements, no one talks about that. You know, but there are certain, and it is given to us females to teach each other about those things, and I'm pretty sure on the male side, Travis should probably know. Even on their side, you know, Sweat Lodge talks and things they
He's
share
not,
amongst
but
them.
he ain't talking or listening.
Yeah, you know, and listen or talk, however he may participate in, you know, the males
You got 2
have their
minutes,
own
Travis, tell us.
different way, different way of explaining that and talking about that.
Does that information come out in some of
It
your?
comes out in the separation of sex
Yeah,
Very
stories.
graphic.
Yeah,
And
very
then,
perfect.
Yeah, that's where it comes out, but it's kind of censored.
Sure.
If you tell the whole story, well, if you're in a ceremonial setting, they'll tell you the whole story. Whether it's a sweat lodge or whether it's whatever ceremony that is taking place. So when you have even like sexual abuse, they have people that are going through like depression, anxiety.
Sure.
Some of them demonstrate the same characteristics of that individual that violated them. So in order to help them, then you have to go dig into your bag and
Right.
bring out some of those stories of
Right.
how some of them are very severe, and you only use them only when someone is affected by it. But to teach it like this, maybe it's good. I don't know. Maybe that's what we need to do, because we're losing a lot of these stories, and
Right.
we're losing a lot of cultural.
So we have no way of fixing it anymore because we've lost, some of it may be lost. So we do need to talk about it in class.
I think so.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But yeah, it is talked about, it's not a taboo. I think the word taboo, I think kind of comes from the Christianity sense of censoring our culture.
I agree.
Because of the whole pagan idea of us being open and free with our own selves, our humanity, or just our being on earth and interacting
Right.
with a lot of animals and plants and, you know, just our elements.
Okay, we'll deal with it. I can deal with it if you want to. I can do that. If I get fired, it's okay. It's about time for me to retire anyway. But I don't want to be inappropriate. I really don't. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But we'll see how we can deal with it. Okay. I'll do it as
As, you know, as Travis said, you know, there are censors, you know, and that
Right.
is why they're in place, you know, so it can be
Right.
talked about. I think a lot of people just don't know how or where to censor,
right.
because everybody has a different idea of what's appropriate and what's